The rain hammered against the windows of the old Victorian house on Maple Street, each drop a reminder of the storm brewing outside and the one that had already passed through Sarah Mitchell's life. At 42 years old, she stood in the kitchen of her childhood home, the house she'd inherited after her mother's death 6 months ago, the same house she'd sworn she'd never return to. Yet here she was, a divorced mother of two, starting over in the place where everything had begun. Sarah ran her fingers along the worn countertop, remembering countless mornings when her mother had stood in this exact spot, preparing breakfast before school. The memories felt both comforting and suffocating. This house held decades of her family's history, but it also represented everything she'd tried to escape when she'd married Derek at 23 and moved to the city. Now, at 42, she was back, carrying the weight of a failed marriage and the responsibility of raising two teenagers alone. If you're enjoying this story, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more compelling real-life narratives. It really helps us continue bringing you these stories. The divorce had been finalized 3 months ago, ending a 19-year marriage that had slowly crumbled under the weight of Derek's infidelity and emotional absence. Sarah had fought to keep the family together for the sake of their children, Emma, 17, and Jake, 14. But there comes a point when staying becomes more damaging than leaving. That point had arrived when she discovered Derek's third affair, this time with someone from his office, young enough to be his daughter. The settlement had been less than generous. Derek's expensive lawyer had ensured that Sarah received minimal support, citing her recent inheritance of the house as significant assets. What they hadn't mentioned was that the house needed extensive repairs, had outdated plumbing, and carried a small mortgage her mother had taken out during her final illness. The life insurance money was barely enough to cover the funeral expenses and outstanding medical bills. So Sarah had made the difficult decision to move back to Riverside, the small Michigan town where she'd grown up. She'd pulled Emma away from her senior year at a prestigious high school and Jake from his middle school friends. The guilt gnawed at her constantly, especially when she saw the resentment in Emma's eyes or heard Jake's increasingly silent retreats to his room. Tonight, Emma was at a sleepover with one of the few girls who'd befriended her at her new school, and Jake was spending the weekend at Derek's apartment in Detroit, 2 hours away. It was the first time Sarah had been completely alone in the house since they'd moved in a month ago. She'd spent the evening going through boxes in the attic, sorting through her mother's belongings, trying to decide what to keep and what to let go. Each item carried a story, a memory, a piece of the past that felt both precious and painful. Her mother's wedding dress, carefully preserved in tissue paper, her father's military medals from his service in Vietnam, photo albums documenting a family that no longer existed in the same form. Around 11 o'clock, Sarah had finally come downstairs, exhausted and emotionally drained. She'd made herself a cup of chamomile tea and was standing at the kitchen window, watching the storm intensify when she heard it. A sound that didn't belong to the old house's usual creaks and groans. A deliberate sound, the sound of breaking glass. Her body went rigid, every nerve suddenly alert. The sound had come from the back of the house, near the mud room that led to the backyard. Sarah's heart began to pound. She set down her tea with shaking hands and reached for her phone on the counter. The screen showed no signal. The storm must have knocked out the cell tower again, a common occurrence in this rural area that she'd forgotten about during her years in the city. The landline. Her mother had kept a landline, one of those old rotary phones that Sarah had thought about disconnecting but hadn't gotten around to yet. It was in the living room. She'd have to cross through the dining room to get to it. Sarah moved quietly toward the kitchen door, her breath shallow and rapid. Another sound reached her ears. Footsteps, heavy footsteps in the mudroom. Then voices, low and male, at least 2 of them. "Check upstairs first," one voice said. "The bedroom's usually where they keep the good stuff." "What about down here?" Another voice responded, younger, nervous. "We'll hit that after. Move quiet. The light's on in the kitchen. Someone might still be up." Sarah's mind raced. She was alone in a house with at least 2 intruders. No cell service. The nearest neighbor was old Mrs. Henderson, 3 houses down, who was probably asleep by now. The police station was downtown, a good 15-minute drive, even without the storm. She had seconds to make a decision. Hide and hope they didn't find her. Try to escape through the front door. Confront them. Then she remembered something. Something important. This wasn't just any house. This was the house where her father, a Vietnam veteran, had raised her with her mother. The house where he'd taught her and her brother survival skills, self-defense, and most importantly, how to stay calm in a crisis. "Fear is natural," he'd told her when she was 12 after a scary incident at the county fair. "But panic is a choice. You can feel fear and still think clearly." Her father had passed away when she was 16, a heart attack that had come without warning. But his lessons had stayed with her. And there was something else, something the intruders didn't know. In the basement, her father had maintained a small workshop. And in that workshop, there was a gun safe. She knew the combination. Had known it since she was 18 when her mother had insisted she learn it, just in case. But getting to the basement meant going through the kitchen, past the mudroom where the intruders had entered. Not an option. Sarah's eyes scanned the kitchen, cataloging potential weapons. A knife block on the counter, cast iron pans hanging from a rack, her mother's heavy wooden rolling pin in a drawer. But her father had also taught her that the best weapon is information and strategy, not force. She heard the intruders moving toward the stairs, their footsteps heavy on the old wooden floors. They were heading upstairs, just as they'd said. This gave her a window, perhaps 5 or 10 minutes to act. Sarah moved swiftly but silently to the knife block, selecting a chef's knife with an 8-inch blade. Not to attack, but to have, just in case. Then she grabbed her phone again, hoping the signal might have returned. Still nothing. She had to think. What were her advantages? She knew this house intimately, every creaking floorboard, every door that stuck, every window that opened easily. The intruders didn't. She knew that the third stair from the top groaned loudly under weight. She knew that the master bedroom closet had a false back that led to an old storage space her father had built. She knew that the basement door looked like a pantry door and that most people missed it entirely. An idea began to form in her mind. A risky idea, but possibly her best chance. Sarah moved to the dining room, keeping her steps light and measured. She could hear the intruders upstairs now, moving through the bedrooms, opening drawers, their voices occasionally audible through the old house's thin floors. "There's nothing up here," the nervous one said. "Just kids' stuff and old lady clothes." "Check the closets. Check under the bed. Sometimes they hide cash in mattresses." Sarah reached the living room and picked up the old rotary phone. She lifted the receiver to her ear. Dial tone. Thank God. Her fingers found the numbers in the dim light, dialing 911. "911, what's your emergency?" The dispatcher's voice was calm, professional. "This is Sarah Mitchell at 428 Maple Street," Sarah whispered urgently. "There are intruders in my house, at least 2 men. They broke in through the back. I'm alone." "Are you safe right now, ma'am?" "They're upstairs. I'm downstairs, but they'll come down soon. I'm dispatching officers to your location right now. Stay on the line with me. Can you get out of the house?" "The back door is where they entered. The front door has a chain lock that makes noise. If I try to leave, they'll hear me." "Is there a room you can lock yourself in?" Sarah thought quickly. "The bathroom off the kitchen has a lock, but it's flimsy. They could break it easily." "What about the basement?" "Yes, there's a basement. The door looks like a pantry. They might not notice it." "Go to the basement if you can do so safely. Lock the door if possible. Officers are en route. Estimated arrival time is 12 minutes. 12 minutes, an eternity when you're alone with intruders." Sarah heard heavy footsteps above her head, moving back toward the stairs. They were coming down. "They're coming downstairs," she breathed into the phone. "Go to the basement now," the dispatcher urged. "Take the phone if it's cordless, or take your cell phone if you have one." "The phone is corded. My cell has no signal." "Then go now. The officers know you'll be in the basement. They'll find you." Sarah set down the phone gently and moved toward the kitchen. She could hear the intruders on the stairs now, their descent accompanied by the groaning of the old wood. "Let's check the main floor," one of them said. "Gotta be something valuable in a house this old." Sarah reached the basement door just as the intruders entered the kitchen. She pulled it open as quietly as possible and slipped inside, closing it behind her with the softest click. The door had a simple slide bolt on the basement side, something her father had installed decades ago. She slid it home, her hands shaking. The basement stairs descended into darkness. Sarah felt along the wall for the light switch, knowing that turning it on might alert the intruders to the basement's existence. She decided to risk it, flipping the switch. A single bare bulb illuminated the stairs. She descended quickly, her mind cataloging her options. The basement was unfinished, with concrete floors and exposed beams. Her father's workshop occupied the far corner, its tools still hanging on pegboards, exactly as he'd left them 26 years ago. The gun safe was there, a small fireproof box bolted to the floor. But Sarah had another idea, one that might work even better than arming herself. The basement had windows, small ones set high in the walls at ground level. They were old-fashioned casement windows that cranked open. One of them, she remembered, was directly below the back porch, concealed by overgrown bushes. If she could open it, she could escape without the intruders knowing. Upstairs, she heard muffled voices, then the sound of drawers being opened, cabinets being searched. "Nothing but old dishes and junk," one intruder complained. "I checked the living room. Sometimes they hide stuff in books or behind pictures." Sarah moved to her father's workbench and found what she needed, a step stool. She carried it to the window below the back porch and climbed up. The window was stiff, its crank mechanism rusted from decades of disuse. She put her weight into it, trying to turn the crank as quietly as possible. It barely moved. Above her, footsteps crossed the kitchen floor, then stopped. "Hey," one of the intruders said. "What's this door?" Sarah's blood turned to ice. They'd found the basement door. "Looks like a pantry or something," the other replied. "Why would a pantry have a bolt on the other side?" Silence. Then the sound of the doorknob turning, rattling against the bolt. "It's locked," the first voice said, "from the inside." "Someone's down there." Sarah abandoned any attempt at silence and cranked the window with all her strength. The mechanism groaned but gave way, the window beginning to swing outward. Above her, something slammed against the basement door. Once, twice. The old wood began to splinter. Sarah got the window open just enough to squeeze through. She grabbed the window frame and pulled herself up, her shoulders barely fitting through the narrow opening. Behind her, she heard the basement door give way with a crash. "Hey, stop!" Sarah's hips caught on the window frame. For a terrifying moment, she was stuck, half in and half out, her legs still dangling into the basement. She heard footsteps pounding down the basement stairs. With a desperate surge of adrenaline, Sarah wrenched herself forward. Her shirt tore on the window latch, and she felt something scrape her ribs, but she was through. She tumbled out onto the wet grass beneath the back porch, landing hard on her shoulder. Pain shot through her arm, but she didn't stop. She rolled out from under the porch and pushed herself to her feet, her clothes soaked from the rain, mud covering her hands and knees. Behind her, she heard cursing from the basement. "She went out the window! Come on!" Sarah ran. The rain was still falling heavily, reducing visibility to just a few yards. She ran toward Mrs. Henderson's house, her lungs burning, her wet clothes heavy and clinging. She'd covered maybe 50 yards when she heard them behind her, crashing through her mother's overgrown garden. She risked a glance back and saw two dark figures, wearing ski masks, larger and faster than she was. They were going to catch her. Sarah changed direction, veering toward the old tool shed at the back of her property. Her father had built it when she was a child, and she'd played in it countless times. She knew it had a back door, hidden by the climbing roses that had overtaken that side of the structure. She reached the shed, just as she heard one of the intruders gaining on her, his breathing harsh and close. Sarah yanked open the front door and dove inside, scrambling across the dirt floor in the darkness. Her hands found familiar shapes. Her father's old lawnmower, garden tools, bags of potting soil. And the back door. Sarah felt for the handle, found it, pushed. The door stuck, swollen from years of rain and neglect. Behind her, the front door burst open. "Got you now," one of the intruders panted. Sarah threw her shoulder against the back door. It gave way suddenly, and she stumbled out into the rain again, falling to her knees in the mud. She heard sirens in the distance. The police were coming, but they weren't here yet. Sarah picked herself up and ran again, this time toward the woods that bordered the back of her property. The intruders were right behind her, cursing the rain and the darkness. She plunged into the tree line, branches whipping at her face and arms. The woods were pitch black, the storm blocking out any moonlight. But Sarah had played in these woods as a child. She knew them. She knew about the old creek bed that cut through the center of the woods, now probably swollen with rainwater. She knew about the narrow deer trails that wound between the trees. She knew about the fallen oak tree that created a natural bridge across the widest part of the creek. The sirens were getting louder. The intruders seemed to realize this, too. "Forget her," one of them shouted. "The cops are coming. We gotta go." "We can't leave her. She saw us." "We're wearing masks, you idiot. She didn't see anything. Come on." Sarah crouched behind a large tree, her chest heaving, her whole body shaking from cold and fear and adrenaline. She heard the intruders crashing back through the woods, away from her, toward the street on the opposite side of the property. The sirens reached a crescendo, then cut off. Red and blue lights flashed through the trees, reflecting off the rain. "Police! This is the Riverside Police Department. Come out with your hands visible." Sarah waited a moment, making sure the intruders were really gone, then stumbled out of the woods toward the lights. 2 police cars were parked in front of her house, their lights painting the rain in alternating colors. "Here," Sarah called out, her voice hoarse. "I'm here. I'm the homeowner." 2 officers appeared, their flashlights finding her in the darkness. Sarah raised her hands, suddenly aware of how she must look, covered in mud, clothes torn, soaking wet, wild-eyed. "Sarah Mitchell?" one officer called out. "Yes. The intruders? They're running toward Oak Street through the woods." The officer spoke into his radio, calling for backup to intercept. Then he and his partner approached Sarah, one of them draping a blanket around her shoulders. "Are you injured, ma'am?" the female officer asked, her voice kind but professional. "I don't think so. Bruised, scared, but okay." The next hours passed in a blur. More police arrived, Paramedics checked Sarah for injuries, finding nothing more serious than scrapes and bruises. She gave her statement multiple times, describing the intruders as best she could. 2 men, both wearing ski masks, one about 6 feet tall, the other shorter and younger sounding. Detective Marcus Chen, a patient man in his 50s with kind eyes, took the lead on the case. He walked through the house with Sarah documenting the damage, the broken window in the mudroom, the splintered basement door, the ransacked upstairs bedrooms. They were looking for quick cash, jewelry, electronics, Detective Chen explained. We've had a series of these break-ins over the past 2 months. Same MO. They target older homes when they think no one's around. Usually they're in and out in under 10 minutes. But I was here, Sarah said, wrapping the blanket tighter around herself. Exactly, which is why we're treating this as a more serious case. Home invasion, not just burglary. These guys got spooked when they realized someone was home. That's when things can go bad fast. You did exactly the right thing by calling 911 and getting to safety. Did you catch them? Detective Chen's expression turned grim. Not yet. They had a car waiting on Oak Street. Took off before our units could get there, but we will catch them. They've been getting bolder, which means they're going to make a mistake. It was nearly 4 a.m. when the police finally left. Sarah stood in her kitchen, looking at the broken window, the muddy footprints tracking through her house, the damage to the basement door. She should have felt violated, angry, scared. Instead, she felt something unexpected, a strange sense of strength. She'd survived. She'd kept her head. She'd used the skills her father had taught her, the knowledge of this house, the ability to think under pressure. She'd protected herself without panic, without freezing. Sarah called Derek's cell phone, knowing he'd be asleep, but needing to tell him what had happened before Jake heard it from someone else. He answered on the 5th ring, his voice thick with sleep. Sarah, it's 4 a.m. What's wrong? There was a break-in at the house tonight. I'm okay, but I wanted you to know before Jake hears about it. The police were here. It's all taken care of now. Derek was suddenly fully awake. A break-in? Jesus, are you sure you're okay? Is anything missing? I'm fine. They didn't get anything. I called 911 and got out of the house. The police are looking for them. Oh, Sarah, this is exactly what I was worried about. That house in that neighborhood, it's not safe. You need to think about selling it and moving somewhere more secure. Sarah felt a familiar frustration rising. This was Derek's pattern, taking any situation and using it to validate his own opinions, to suggest that her choices were wrong. Derek, this could have happened anywhere, even in our old neighborhood in the city. Crime doesn't discriminate based on property values. But you were alone. What if something had happened? What if they'd hurt you? But they didn't. I handled it. You shouldn't have to handle it. You should be somewhere safe, somewhere protected. Sarah took a deep breath, pushing down her irritation. Derek, I'm telling you because Jake should hear it from us, not from social media or his friends. Can you explain to him what happened and that I'm fine? I don't want him to worry. Oh, of course. But Sarah, we need to talk about this, about whether that house is really the right place for you and the kids. We'll talk later. Right now I need to get some sleep. After she hung up, Sarah sat at her kitchen table watching the rain finally begin to ease. Dawn was breaking, a gray light creeping across the sky. Her phone buzzed with text messages as the cell service came back online. Emma, checking in from her sleepover, asking if everything was okay after seeing something on social media about police activity on Maple Street. Mrs. Henderson, who'd been awakened by the sirens and wanted to make sure Sarah was all right. Sarah responded to each message, reassuring everyone, downplaying the drama. But inside, she was processing something important, something that had shifted during those terrifying minutes when she'd been alone with intruders in her house. She'd discovered that she was stronger than she'd thought, more capable, more resilient. For months, since the divorce became inevitable, Sarah had felt like a victim of Derek's infidelity, of his emotional manipulation, of a legal system that seemed designed to protect his assets rather than their family's welfare, a victim of circumstances that had forced her to uproot her children and return to a town she'd left behind decades ago. But tonight, she hadn't been a victim. She'd been a survivor, a fighter, someone who could face danger and respond with intelligence and courage. The sun continued to rise, burning through the storm clouds. Sarah made herself a pot of coffee and started making calls. To a locksmith, to have all the locks changed, to a security company to get an estimate on an alarm system, to a window repair service. She also called Detective Chen, who answered despite the early hour. Mrs. Mitchell, how are you holding up? I'm okay. Detective, I was thinking about what you said, about these break-ins happening for 2 months. Have any of the other victims gotten a good look at these men? Unfortunately, no. They've been targeting homes when people are away. You're the first person to actually encounter them. So I'm the best chance you have of identifying them. Potentially, yes. Though with the masks, it's difficult. We'd need something else, a voice recognition, a distinctive marking, something. And one of them had an accent, not strong, but I noticed it. He said gotta like gatta, and his vowels were flattened. I think maybe he was from the Upper Peninsula, or northern Wisconsin. Sarah could hear the interest in Detective Chen's voice. That's good. That's very good. What else did you notice? Sarah closed her eyes, replaying the night in her mind. The younger one was nervous. He kept questioning the other one's decisions. The older one called him something, I think, not his name, but like kid or something similar. We're going to need you to work with a forensic audio specialist. They can help reconstruct the voices, and we can compare them to known offenders in the area. Would you be willing to do that? Absolutely. These men broke into my home, they terrorized me, and they're out there doing the same thing to other families. I want to help catch them. Over the next week, Sarah worked closely with the police. She spent hours with the audio specialist, reconstructing the intruders' voices and speech patterns. She reviewed surveillance footage from nearby properties, trying to identify the vehicle they'd used. She worked with a sketch artist, trying to capture any details she'd noticed about their builds, their movements, their body language. The investigation consumed her free time, but it also gave her a sense of purpose. She was no longer just a divorced mother trying to survive. She was actively fighting back, taking control of her narrative. Emma and Jake both reacted differently to the break-in. Emma, initially terrified for her mother, became fiercely protective. She insisted on installing video doorbells and motion sensor lights. She researched self-defense classes and signed both herself and Sarah up for a women's safety workshop at the community center. Jake, on the other hand, became withdrawn. He'd always been a quiet kid, but after the break-in, he retreated even further into himself. He spent more time in his room, headphones on, avoiding conversation. One evening, about 10 days after the incident, Sarah found Jake sitting in the backyard, staring at the tool shed where she'd hidden from the intruders. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Hey, Sarah said softly, sitting down beside him on the back steps. Want to talk about it? Jake shrugged, not looking at her. You know I'm okay, right? I wasn't hurt. I'm safe. I know. His voice was barely above a whisper. But you're worried anyway. Jake finally turned to look at her, and Sarah was shocked to see tears on his cheeks. What if they come back? What if next time you're not so lucky? Sarah's heart broke. She pulled Jake into a hug, holding him tight as he cried. Oh, sweetheart, I know it's scary. It scared me too. But the police are working hard to catch these men. And we've made the house more secure. New locks, alarm system, cameras. This house is safer now than it's ever been. Dad says we shouldn't be here. He says this town is dangerous. Sarah felt a surge of anger at Derek for putting that fear into their son's head, but she kept her voice calm. Jake, bad things can happen anywhere. In the city, in small towns, even in the safest neighborhoods. What happened here was scary, but it doesn't define this place, and it doesn't define us. I just don't want to lose you too, Jake said, his voice cracking. First Grandma died, then you and Dad split up, and now this. It feels like everything's falling apart. Sarah held him tighter. I know it does, and I'm so sorry you're going through all of this. It's not fair that you have to deal with grown-up problems when you're only 14, but I promise you, I'm not going anywhere. I'm right here. And I'm going to do everything in my power to keep you and your sister safe. They sat together as the sun finished setting, Jake's tears eventually subsiding. Sarah felt the weight of her responsibility as a parent, the crushing awareness that her children were processing trauma and loss and fear, and that she had to be strong enough for all of them. Your grandfather used to sit right here with me when I was about your age, Sarah said after a while. I'd had a bad day at school, some girls had been mean to me, and I felt like I didn't fit in anywhere. And he told me something I've never forgotten. Jake looked at her with red-rimmed eyes. What did he say? He said that life is going to knock you down. It's going to hit you hard sometimes, and it's going to hurt. But the measure of a person isn't whether they fall. It's whether they get back up. And not just get back up, but stand even stronger than before. Did you get back up at school? Sarah smiled. I did. It took time, and it was hard, but I did. And I'm getting back up now, after everything with your dad, after the break-in, after all of it. Because that's what we do. We're survivors. You and me and your sister. We get back up. Jake nodded slowly. I want to learn self-defense, like you're doing with Emma. Then you will. We'll all learn together. That conversation marked a turning point. Jake began to open up more, to engage with the process of healing rather than hiding from it. Emma continued her fierce protectiveness, but also started to soften, to accept that her mother was capable of taking care of herself and their family. 2 weeks after the break-in, Detective Chen called Sarah with news. We got them, he said, and Sarah could hear the satisfaction in his voice. Both of them. They tried to break into another house last night, but this time the homeowner had a security camera we'd asked him to upgrade. We got clear footage of their vehicle, traced the plates, and arrested them this morning. Sarah sat down, her legs suddenly weak with relief. That's incredible. Who are they? Two local men, brothers actually, Marcus and Tyler Bowden. They've both got prior records, mostly petty theft and drug charges. The older one, Marcus, has been unemployed for 2 years. The younger one, Tyler, just turned 21. They've been funding a drug habit with these break-ins. Will they go to prison? They're looking at serious time. Multiple counts of burglary, home invasion, assault with intent in one case where a homeowner tried to fight back. The prosecutor is throwing the book at them. And your testimony, your identification of their voices and speech patterns, that's going to be crucial evidence. I'll testify, Sarah said without hesitation. Whatever you need. I thought you might say that. You're a brave woman, Mrs. Mitchell. What you did that night, the way you handled yourself, that's exceptional. Most people would have frozen or panicked. You kept your head. After the call ended, Sarah walked through her house, seeing it with new eyes. The repairs had been made, the window fixed, the basement door replaced, the muddy footprints scrubbed away. But more than that, the house felt different. It felt like hers now, not just her mother's old house that she'd reluctantly inherited. She'd defended this house, she'd fought for it, and in doing so, she'd reclaimed something of herself that she'd lost during her marriage, her sense of agency, her confidence, her strength. That weekend, Sarah, Emma, and Jake worked together to clean out the attic. They went through the remaining boxes of family belongings, sorting, organizing, deciding what to keep and what to donate. It was bittersweet work, full of laughter and tears as they discovered old photos, her father's military uniform, her mother's collection of vintage teacups. In one box, Sarah found her father's old journal, the one he'd kept during his time in Vietnam. She'd never read it before, her mother had kept it private. But now, sitting in the attic with her children, Sarah opened it carefully. The entries were sporadic, written in her father's neat handwriting. Most detailed daily life, the routines of military service, letters from home. But one entry caught Sarah's attention, dated June 15th, 1970. Saw combat today for the first time. Lost 2 men from our unit. I was scared, more scared than I've ever been. But I did my job, I kept my head, and I survived. Captain Johnson told me afterward that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's acting despite fear. I think he's right. I think I understand now that being brave doesn't mean you're not afraid. It means you're afraid and you do what needs to be done anyway. I hope if I ever have children I can teach them that. Real courage is just love plus fear plus action. Sarah read the passage aloud to Emma and Jake, her voice catching on the last line. Love plus fear plus action. That's what you did, Emma said softly. During the break-in, you were scared, but you acted anyway. Because you love us, because you wanted to survive for us. And that's what you're both doing now, Sarah responded. Facing your fears about this new life, this new town, everything that's changed. You're scared, but you're still showing up, still trying. That's courage. They finished sorting the attic as the afternoon light faded. That evening, Sarah made dinner for her children. Nothing fancy, just spaghetti and salad. But they ate together at the kitchen table, talking and laughing, and for the first time in months, it felt like they were a family again. Different than before, smaller, scarred, but still whole. Over the following months, life settled into a new rhythm. Sarah found work as a freelance graphic designer, something she'd done before her marriage, but had given up when the children were young. The flexibility allowed her to work from home, to be present for Emma and Jake, while still contributing financially. Emma thrived at her new school, joining the debate team and making a close group of friends. She was accepted to the University of Michigan, her first choice, with a partial scholarship. Jake found his place too, joining the school's robotics club and discovering a talent for engineering that reminded Sarah of her father. The weeks following the arrests brought an unexpected challenge: media attention. A local reporter had picked up the story, and suddenly Sarah found herself being called the woman who outsmarted burglars in headlines. The newspaper wanted an interview. The local TV station requested her appearance on their morning show. Sarah initially declined all requests. She didn't want to be defined by one traumatic night, didn't want her children exposed to constant reminders of what had happened. But Detective Chen convinced her that sharing her story might help other potential victims, might educate people about home security and crisis response. So Sarah agreed to one interview with a local newspaper. She sat in her living room with reporter Jennifer Martinez, a woman in her 30s with an empathetic manner and intelligent questions. "What went through your mind when you realized there were intruders in your house?" Jennifer asked. Sarah thought carefully before answering. "Fear, definitely, but also this strange clarity. My father was a veteran, and he taught me that panic is a choice. You can feel afraid and still think logically. So I focused on what I could control, calling for help, getting to safety, using my knowledge of the house to my advantage. You grew up in this house? I did. I left when I got married at 23, lived in Detroit for almost 20 years. Coming back after my mother passed away felt like failure at first, like I'd gone backwards in life. But that night, being in this house, knowing every corner of it, that's what saved me. Jennifer wrote notes, then looked up. You're recently divorced. Was that part of why you moved back? Sarah hesitated. This was personal territory, but she'd agreed to be honest. Yes, the divorce was difficult, and the settlement left me with limited options financially. Inheriting this house seemed like a burden initially. Now I see it as a gift, a chance to rebuild, to remember who I was before I lost myself in a marriage that wasn't healthy. Do you have any advice for other women going through similar transitions? Trust yourself, Sarah said immediately. Trust your instincts, your abilities, your strength. I spent years letting someone else define my worth, my capabilities. When I was forced to rely on myself, I discovered I was much stronger than I'd believed. That's true for so many women. We're capable of more than we know. The article ran the following week, and the response surprised Sarah. She received emails and letters from women across the state, sharing their own stories of divorce, of starting over, of facing fears and discovering strength. Several were from women who'd experienced break-ins or home invasions and felt empowered by Sarah's story. One letter particularly moved her. It was from a woman named Patricia, who'd been the victim of a home invasion 3 years earlier. Unlike Sarah, Patricia had been physically assaulted during the incident and had struggled with PTSD ever since. Reading your story gave me hope, Patricia wrote. I've been living in fear, unable to sleep, unable to feel safe anywhere. But you showed that it's possible to face trauma and come out stronger. You showed that being a victim of a crime doesn't mean you have to remain a victim in your mind. Thank you for your courage in sharing your experience. Sarah responded to Patricia personally, and they began a correspondence that evolved into friendship. Patricia lived in Ann Arbor, about an hour away, and they eventually met for coffee. Patricia was 47, a nurse, mother of 3 grown children. The home invasion had happened when she was working a night shift. Her husband had been home alone and badly injured trying to protect their property. We moved afterward, Patricia told Sarah over coffee at a small cafe in Riverside. Sold the house, bought a condo in a secured building. But the fear followed me. I thought changing locations would fix it, but trauma doesn't work that way. Have you gotten help, therapy? Some, but I think I've been treating it like a weakness, something to overcome alone. Your article made me realize that strength isn't about not needing help. It's about being brave enough to seek it. The conversation with Patricia planted a seed in Sarah's mind. She thought about Detective Chen's suggestion, about using her experience to help others. She began researching victim advocacy more seriously, looking into training programs and certification requirements. Meanwhile, the legal proceedings against Marcus and Tyler Bowden moved forward. Sarah was contacted by the prosecutor's office, Assistant District Attorney Karen Williams, a sharp woman in her early 40s who'd been handling violent crimes for over a decade. I want to be upfront with you about what to expect, Karen told Sarah during their first meeting at the courthouse. Defense attorneys are going to try to poke holes in your testimony. They'll question your observations, your memory, your state of mind during the incident. It's not personal, it's their job, but it can feel brutal. I understand, Sarah said. I'm prepared for that. Good, because your testimony is crucial. You're the only victim who actually encountered these men, who can testify to their words, their actions, their intent. The other break-ins are property crimes. Yours is different. You feared for your life, and rightfully so. That escalates everything. In preparation for the trial, Sarah worked extensively with Karen and her team. They went over her testimony dozens of times, anticipating every possible question the defense might ask. Sarah learned about the brothers' backgrounds. Marcus, 32, had dropped out of high school and bounced between jobs before falling into drug addiction. Tyler, 21, had a learning disability and had followed his older brother into increasingly serious criminal behavior. Does knowing their story change how you feel? Karen asked during one preparation session. Sarah considered the question carefully. It makes me sad for them. It's clear they made terrible choices, but those choices came from somewhere. Poverty, addiction, lack of opportunity, maybe abuse or neglect in their past. But no, it doesn't change what they did. They terrorized me. They could have hurt me or killed me. Understanding why someone commits a crime doesn't excuse the crime. The trial began on a cold morning in March. Sarah arrived at the courthouse early, dressed in a simple navy suit that Emma had helped her choose. You want to look professional but approachable? Emma had advised, showing a maturity beyond her years. You want the jury to relate to you? Jake had wanted to attend the trial, but Sarah had firmly refused. This is adult business, she told him. I need you to focus on school and being a kid for a little while longer. Emma, now 18 and attending community college while living at home before transferring to University of Michigan in the fall, was allowed to attend if she wanted. She chose to be there for her mother's testimony. The courtroom was smaller than Sarah had expected, with worn wooden benches and fluorescent lighting that cast everything in a harsh glow. The jury box held 12 people of varying ages, all looking serious and attentive. Marcus and Tyler Bowden sat at the defense table with their attorneys, both men dressed in ill-fitting suits, looking nothing like the threatening figures Sarah had fled from that stormy night. Sarah was called to the stand on the second day of trial. She placed her hand on the Bible, swore to tell the truth, and took her seat. From this vantage point, she could see everything. The jury, the judge, the attorneys, the defendants, and Emma sitting in the gallery giving her an encouraging smile. Karen Williams approached the witness stand, her manner professional but warm. "Mrs. Mitchell, can you please tell the jury what happened on the night of November 7th? Sarah took a breath and began. She described the storm, the broken window, the voices in her house. She recounted calling 911, hiding in the basement, escaping through the window. She spoke clearly and calmly, maintaining eye contact with the jury, watching their reactions. Some looked horrified, others angry. One older woman had tears in her eyes. "And at any point during this incident, did you feel your life was in danger?" Karen asked. "Absolutely. When they realized I was in the basement, when they chased me through my yard and into the woods, I believed they would hurt me if they caught me. I feared for my life." "Thank you, Mrs. Mitchell. No further questions." The defense attorney for Marcus Bowden, a middle-aged man named Robert Hutchins, approached for cross-examination. His manner was polite but probing. "Mrs. Mitchell, you've testified that you heard my client's voice, but he was wearing a mask, correct?" "Yes." "So you never actually saw his face?" "No, I didn't." "And you were frightened, in a state of extreme stress?" "Yes." "Isn't it possible that, in your frightened state, you misheard or misremembered what was said?" Sarah met his eyes steadily. "No, I remember very clearly. The voices are burned into my memory." "But memory is fallible, isn't it? Especially under stress?" "Memory can be fallible, yes, but I'm certain of what I heard." "You've also testified that one of the intruders had an accent. Can you really be certain of that?" "Yes, I grew up in Michigan. I know how people from different regions speak. One of the men had flattened vowels and certain pronunciations that suggested Upper Peninsula or northern Wisconsin origins." "That's quite specific. Are you a linguist, Mrs. Mitchell?" "No, but I'm observant." "Or perhaps you're filling in details that support the prosecution's case." Karen objected. "Argumentative." "Sustained," the judge ruled. The cross-examination continued for another 30 minutes, but Sarah held her ground. She didn't embellish, didn't get defensive, didn't lose her composure. She simply told the truth as she remembered it. When she was finally dismissed, Sarah felt exhausted but relieved. Emma met her outside the courtroom, hugging her tightly. "You were amazing, Mom, so strong." "I just told the truth." "You did more than that. You showed them who you are." The trial lasted 5 more days. Other witnesses testified. Detective Chen, the forensic audio specialist, the homeowners of other houses the Bowden brothers had burglarized. Physical evidence was presented. The ski masks found in the brothers' vehicle, tools used in the break-ins, stolen property recovered from their apartment. The defense tried to paint the brothers as desperate men driven by addiction, deserving of treatment rather than lengthy prison sentences. Their mother testified, a worn-looking woman in her 60s, who wept as she described her son's difficult childhoods, their father's abandonment, their struggles with poverty and substance abuse. Sarah felt sympathy for the mother, but it didn't change the facts. The Bowden brothers had made choices. They'd terrorized innocent people. They needed to face consequences. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. When they returned, their verdict was unanimous, guilty on all counts. Marcus Bowden received 15 years. Tyler Bowden, younger and with a less extensive criminal record, received 8 years with possibility of parole after 5. After the verdict was read, Detective Chen approached Sarah in the courthouse hallway. "Justice served," he said. "Thanks to you?" "Thanks to a lot of people," Sarah replied. "You, your team, the other victims who came forward. Still, you were the key. Your ability to stay calm under pressure, to observe details even when you were terrified, that made the difference. Ever thought about working in law enforcement?" Sarah laughed. "Not exactly my skill set, but thank you." "I'm serious. We need people like you, people who can think clearly in a crisis. Victims advocates, crisis counselors, even investigators. Think about it." The conversation stayed with Sarah. She did think about it. She researched victim advocacy programs, crisis response training, ways she might use her experience to help others who'd faced similar traumas. She discovered a program through the county prosecutor's office, a victim advocate certification course that trained individuals to support crime victims through the legal process, connecting them with resources, helping them understand their rights. The program required 40 hours of training plus supervised fieldwork. Sarah enrolled immediately. She attended evening classes twice a week, learning about trauma-informed care, the criminal justice system, crisis intervention techniques, and community resources. She met other advocates, people who'd been drawn to this work through their own experiences with crime or trauma. One of her instructors was a woman named Dr. Lisa Chen, a psychologist who specialized in trauma recovery. She was about 50, with kind eyes, and a no-nonsense manner that Sarah appreciated. Victim advocacy isn't about saving people, Dr. Chen told the class during one session. It's about empowering them to save themselves. You provide information, support, resources, but the healing journey belongs to the victim. Your job is to walk beside them, not carry them. The words resonated deeply with Sarah. She thought about her own journey, how she'd had to find her own strength, make her own choices about how to respond to what had happened. The support of the police, her children, her friends, had been crucial, but ultimately the work of healing had been hers alone. During her fieldwork, Sarah was paired with experienced advocate Monica Torres, a bilingual advocate who'd been doing this work for 12 years. Monica was about Sarah's age, with a warm smile and unflappable demeanor. Every victim is different, Monica told Sarah as they prepared to meet with a domestic violence survivor. Some want detailed information about every step of the legal process. Others are overwhelmed and need you to simplify everything. Your job is to read the person, understand what they need, and adapt. Sarah shadowed Monica through dozens of cases: domestic violence survivors seeking restraining orders, elderly victims of financial fraud, parents whose children had been assaulted, families dealing with drunk driving accidents. Each case was heartbreaking in its own way, but also inspiring. Sarah witnessed remarkable resilience, saw people finding strength they didn't know they possessed, watched them rebuild their lives after trauma. She also learned about the gaps in the system, the ways victims fell through cracks. Resources were limited, shelters were full, therapy had long waiting lists, legal processes were slow and confusing. Many victims, especially those without financial means or social support, struggled to navigate the aftermath of crime. Sarah began to see patterns, identify needs that weren't being met. She started making connections, building a network of resources. She discovered that her skills in organization and communication, honed during her years managing a household and doing freelance design work, translated well into advocacy work. 6 months after completing her certification, Sarah was hired as a part-time victim advocate by the county prosecutor's office. It wasn't glamorous work, and it didn't pay particularly well, but it gave Sarah a sense of purpose she'd never experienced before. Her first solo case was a woman named Jennifer, 26 years old, whose apartment had been broken into while she was at work. Nothing of significant monetary value had been taken, but the violation of her space had left Jennifer terrified and unable to sleep. "I know it sounds silly," Jennifer said during their first meeting, her voice apologetic. "It's not like I was home, it's not like they hurt me, but I keep thinking about them touching my things, going through my drawers, being in my bedroom." "It's not silly at all," Sarah said firmly. "Your home is supposed to be your safe space. Having that violated, having strangers invade your privacy, that's traumatic. Your feelings are completely valid." Jennifer's eyes filled with tears. "My boyfriend thinks I'm overreacting. He says I should just get better locks and move on." Sarah felt a flash of anger at the boyfriend, but kept her voice neutral. "Trauma doesn't work that way. You can't just decide to be over it. Recovery takes time, and it's different for everyone. Have you thought about therapy?" "I can't afford it. I don't have insurance through my job." Sarah pulled out her resource list. "There are options. The county has a victim services fund that can help pay for counseling, and there's a therapist in town who does sliding scale fees based on income. Would you like me to help you set up an appointment?" Jennifer nodded, looking relieved. "Yes, thank you. It helps just knowing I'm not crazy for feeling this way." "You're not crazy. You're having a normal response to an abnormal situation, and you're taking steps to heal. That's courage." Working with Jennifer and other victims, Sarah found herself drawing on her own experience constantly. She knew what it felt like to have your sense of safety shattered. She knew the insomnia, the hypervigilance, the way ordinary sounds could trigger fear. She knew the frustration of well-meaning people who didn't understand why you couldn't just get over it. But she also knew recovery was possible. She was living proof. As spring turned to summer, Sarah's life settled into a rhythm that felt sustainable and meaningful. She worked 20 hours a week as a victim advocate, still did freelance design work to supplement her income, and devoted the rest of her time to her children and her own healing. Jake finished his freshman year of high school with good grades and had made a close group of friends through robotics club. He'd grown 3 inches over the past year and his voice had deepened. He was becoming a young man, more confident, more open than he'd been in those dark months after the divorce and break-in. Emma was thriving at community college, taking general education requirements while working part-time at a local bookstore. She decided to major in psychology, inspired partly by watching her mother's work as a victim advocate. "I want to help people too," Emma told Sarah one evening as they prepared dinner together. "I used to think I wanted to be a lawyer, to fight for justice in court, but I think I'd rather work directly with people, helping them heal." "That's a beautiful goal," Sarah said. "Have you thought about what specifically you'd want to do?" "Maybe trauma therapy, or working with teenagers who've experienced violence or abuse. I don't know exactly yet, but watching how you've taken something terrible and used it to help others, that's inspired me." Sarah felt her eyes well with tears. "I'm so proud of you, not just for your career goals, but for who you are. You've been through so much this past year, and you've handled it with such grace and maturity." "I learned from you, Mom. You showed us that we're stronger than we think." Derek had also evolved over the past year. His relationship with his children had improved as he'd made more effort to be present and engaged, rather than just the fun weekend dad. He and Sarah had developed a functional co-parenting relationship, communicating regularly about the kids' needs and activities. One Saturday in July, Derek came to pick up Jake for their weekend together. Instead of waiting in the car as he usually did, he knocked on the door and asked if he could come in for a moment. "I wanted to see the house," he said, looking around the renovated living room. "The kids talk about all the changes you've made." Sarah hesitated, then stepped aside to let him enter. Derek walked through the rooms, noting the fresh paint, the updated fixtures, the carefully chosen furniture that mixed pieces from her mother's house with new additions. "It looks great, Sarah, really. You've made it a home." "Thank you. It's been a lot of work, but it's worth it." Derek paused in the kitchen, looking out the window toward the backyard. "I need to apologize for how I acted after the break-in. I was scared, and I handled it badly. Instead of supporting you, I tried to use it as evidence that you'd made a mistake moving here." Sarah studied her ex-husband. He looked older, lines around his eyes and gray in his hair that hadn't been there a year ago. "I appreciate that. The break-in was traumatic, but this house, this town, this life we're building here, it's been good for us, for me and the kids." "I can see that. Jake seems happier, more settled. And Emma, she's really coming into her own. You've done an amazing job with them, especially this past year. I know I wasn't always supportive during the divorce, and I'm sorry for that too." It was the most honest conversation they'd had in years, maybe ever. Sarah realized that Derek had been doing his own work, his own growing. The divorce had been difficult for him too, forcing him to confront his choices and their consequences. "We're in a better place now," Sarah said to him. "All of us. It took time and pain, but we got here." "You got here," Derek corrected gently. "You're the one who had the courage to leave, to start over, to build something new. I'm just trying to catch up." After Derek and Jake left, Sarah stood in her quiet house, processing the conversation. She felt no desire to reconcile with Derek, no longing for what had been, but she felt gratitude for the closure, for the mutual respect they'd finally achieved. It felt like the final chapter of their marriage story was being written, ending not with bitterness, but with acceptance and even a measure of grace. That evening, Sarah sat in her backyard watching the fireflies emerge as twilight deepened. She thought about the past year, about everything that had changed. She thought about the terrified woman who'd fled through this yard with masked intruders pursuing her and the woman she'd become since then. The trauma of that night hadn't disappeared. Sarah still sometimes woke from nightmares, still felt her heart race when she heard unexpected noises, but she'd learned to manage those responses, to ground herself, to remind herself that she was safe. More importantly, she'd learned that trauma doesn't have to define you. You can acknowledge what happened, honor the fear and pain it caused, and still move forward. You can use it as a catalyst for growth rather than allowing it to be an anchor that holds you back. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from Patricia, her friend from Ann Arbor. "Just wanted to tell you I'm starting EMDR therapy next week. Finally ready to really address the trauma. Thank you for inspiring me to take this step." Sarah typed back, "So proud of you. You're braver than you know. Let me know if you need support through the process." Another text came in, this time from Monica Torres, her supervisor at the victim advocacy office. "Hey, we just got assigned a new case, a home invasion similar to yours. Victim is really struggling. Would you be willing to work with her? I think your experience could really help." Sarah didn't hesitate. "Absolutely. Send me the details." This was her purpose now, taking the worst experience of her life and transforming it into something meaningful, helping others find their strength, their path to healing, their way forward. The new client Monica had mentioned was named Rebecca, a 34-year-old elementary school teacher who lived alone in a small house on the east side of town. Her home invasion had occurred 3 weeks earlier, in the middle of the afternoon while she was homesick from work. 2 men had forced their way through her back door, unaware she was inside. Unlike Sarah's experience, Rebecca had been discovered immediately, confronted directly by the intruders. They hadn't physically harmed her, but they'd threatened her, demanded money and valuables, and kept her terrified for nearly 20 minutes before fleeing with her laptop, jewelry, and the cash she'd had in her purse. The police had not yet made any arrests. When Sarah met Rebecca for the first time at the prosecutor's office, she saw her own fear reflected in the younger woman's eyes. Rebecca was pale, thin, with dark circles under her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. Her hands shook as she filled out the intake forms. "Thank you for meeting with me," Rebecca said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Monica said you went through something similar." "I did," Sarah confirmed gently. "Not exactly the same. Every situation is unique, but I understand some of what you're feeling." "I can't sleep," Rebecca said, the words tumbling out. "I can't stay in my house. I've been sleeping on my sister's couch for 3 weeks. I can't go back there. Every time I try, I start having a panic attack. But I can't afford to move, and my sister has 3 kids in a small apartment. I can't keep staying with her." Sarah listened, letting Rebecca talk, hearing the familiar spiral of fear and helplessness. She remembered those feelings, the way trauma could make you feel trapped and powerless. "The fear is real," Sarah said, "and what happened to you was genuinely terrifying. You're not overreacting. Your brain is doing exactly what it's supposed to do after a traumatic event, trying to keep you safe by avoiding the place where you felt unsafe. But I can't live like this forever." "No, you can't, and you won't. But healing isn't linear, and it takes time. Right now, we're going to focus on small, manageable steps. First, have you talked to anyone professionally about what happened?" Rebecca shook her head. "I don't even know where to start." Over the next hour, Sarah walked Rebecca through the available resources. They set up an appointment with a trauma therapist who specialized in PTSD. They discussed options for home security upgrades, some of which were covered by the Victim Assistance Fund. Sarah connected Rebecca with a support group for crime victims that met twice monthly at the community center. "Here's what I want you to know," Sarah said as their meeting drew to a close. "What happened to you doesn't define you. It's something that happened, not who you are. And you're stronger than you think. I know it doesn't feel that way right now, but you are." "How did you get past it?" Rebecca asked. "How did you stop being afraid?" Sarah considered the question carefully. "I didn't stop being afraid, not completely. I still have moments when I hear a strange noise and my heart races. I still sometimes wake up from nightmares about that night. But I learned that courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about being afraid and doing what you need to do anyway, and I found purpose in it. I used what happened to me to help others, which transformed my trauma from something that diminished me into something that empowered me. I don't know if I can do that. You don't have to know right now. Right now, you just need to take the next small step. Go to therapy. Join the support group. Start with one night back in your house, even just an hour with your sister there if that helps. Small steps, Rebecca. That's how you climb out of this." Working with Rebecca over the following weeks reminded Sarah of how far she'd come in her own healing journey. She saw her past self in Rebecca's fear and hesitation, but she also saw the potential for growth and recovery. She watched as Rebecca slowly began to reclaim her life, first spending a few hours at her house with her sister present, then a full afternoon alone, then finally her first night sleeping in her own bed. The breakthrough came 6 weeks after they'd first met. Rebecca called Sarah, her voice trembling but excited. "I stayed at my house for 3 nights in a row. I'm still nervous, but it's getting better. And I did something else. I signed up to volunteer at the women's shelter. I want to help other people like you helped me." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. "Rebecca, that's wonderful. I'm so proud of you. I couldn't have done it without you. You showed me it was possible." After hanging up, Sarah sat quietly in her home office, a converted bedroom upstairs that overlooked the backyard. She thought about the ripple effect of trauma and healing. Her father had taught her courage, which had helped her survive the break-in. That survival had led her to advocacy work, which was helping people like Rebecca heal. And Rebecca was now going to help others in turn. It was a chain of healing, each person's strength empowering the next. As summer faded into fall, Sarah's life continued to evolve in unexpected ways. The victim advocacy program had grown, and Sarah was asked to develop and teach a workshop on home safety and personal security. She partnered with Detective Chen and the local police department to create a comprehensive program that covered everything from basic security measures to crisis response strategies. The first workshop was held on a Saturday morning in September at the community center. Sarah had expected maybe 15 or 20 people. Instead, over 60 residents showed up, filling the room to capacity. They were mostly women, but there were also elderly residents, young professionals, and even a few families with teenagers. Sarah stood at the front of the room, looking out at the sea of faces, and felt a moment of nervousness. Public speaking had never been her strength. But then she remembered her father's words about courage being love plus fear plus action. She loved her community, she feared for their safety, and this was the action she could take. Good morning, everyone. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and about a year ago, 2 masked men broke into my home while I was alone inside. She paused, watching the room's attention sharpen. What happened that night was terrifying, but I survived it, and I learned some valuable lessons that I want to share with you today. Not to scare you, but to empower you. Because the best defense against crime is preparation, awareness, and knowledge. For the next 2 hours, Sarah and Detective Chen walked the group through practical security measures, proper lighting, secure locks, alarm systems, the importance of neighborhood awareness. They discussed what to do if you come home to signs of a break-in, how to create a family safety plan, when to engage, and when to flee. Sarah shared her own story, the decisions she'd made, the mistakes she'd acknowledged. I left my phone in the kitchen when I went upstairs that night. That was a mistake. I should have had it with me. But I also made good decisions. I called 911 immediately when I heard the intruders. I knew my house well enough to find escape routes. I stayed calm enough to think strategically rather than just reacting in panic. During the question and answer session, a young woman in her 20s raised her hand. How do you deal with the fear afterward? I've never been broken into, but I'm terrified of it happening. I check my locks 5 times before bed. I hear every little noise at night. Is that normal? Vigilance is healthy, Sarah said, but when it crosses into anxiety that interferes with your quality of life, that's when you might want to talk to someone. There's a difference between being reasonably cautious and being controlled by fear. The goal is to take sensible precautions and then live your life fully, not to live in constant terror. An elderly man stood up. My wife died 2 years ago. I live alone now and I worry about being a target. What can someone like me do? Detective Chen fielded this question. Stay connected with neighbors. Let them know you live alone and ask them to keep an eye out for unusual activity. Consider a medical alert system that includes home security features. Join a neighborhood watch program. Community is one of your best defenses. The workshop concluded with participants exchanging contact information, forming neighborhood groups, committing to looking out for one another. Sarah watched the connections being made, the community strengthening itself, and felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Mrs. Henderson, Sarah's neighbor, approached as the crowd dispersed. That was wonderful, dear. You've really found your calling. Thank you, Mrs. Henderson. That means a lot. Your mother would be so proud of you. She always said you had a strength in you that you hadn't tapped into yet. Looks like she was right. The mention of her mother brought a wave of emotion. Sarah's mother had passed away before seeing Sarah's divorce, before the break-in, before this transformation. But in a way, her mother had made all of this possible by leaving Sarah this house, by giving her a place to rebuild. That evening, Sarah sat in her mother's old armchair, the one she'd reupholstered in a cheerful floral pattern. She picked up a photo album she'd been going through, one filled with pictures of her childhood. There was her father in his army uniform, young and serious, her mother on their wedding day, radiant with hope. Sarah herself as a child, grinning gap-toothed at the camera, her whole life ahead of her. She thought about the girl in those photos, how that girl had grown into a woman who'd lost herself for a while in a difficult marriage, who'd been broken down and forced to rebuild, and how that rebuilding had revealed strength and purpose she'd never known she possessed. Emma came home from her evening class, dropping her backpack by the door. Hey, Mom, how did the workshop go? Really well. Over 60 people came. We're planning to do them quarterly now. Emma plopped down on the couch, grabbing an apple from the fruit bowl. That's amazing. Oh, I meant to tell you, I talked to my advisor today about the psychology program at U of M. She thinks I should consider specializing in trauma psychology. She said with my personal experience and volunteer work, I'd be a strong candidate for their graduate program eventually. That's wonderful, honey. Is that what you want? Emma considered, taking a bite of her apple. Yeah, I think so. I used to be so angry about the divorce, about moving here, about everything changing. But now I see how all of it, even the scary stuff like the break-in, has shaped who I'm becoming. I want to help people the way you do, but maybe in a more clinical setting. You're going to be incredible at whatever you choose to do. Jake came downstairs, his hair wet from a shower. What's for dinner? I'm starving. I was thinking we'd order pizza. It's been a long day. Can we do movie night too? Jake asked. Like we used to? Sarah smiled. Movie nights had been a tradition before the divorce, something that had fallen away during the difficult transition. They'd started doing them again occasionally over the past few months, a small way of creating new family rituals. Absolutely, your choice tonight. As they waited for the pizza to arrive, the 3 of them settled on the couch, scrolling through movie options, debating choices, laughing together. Sarah looked at her children, nearly grown now, and felt overwhelmed with love and gratitude. They'd been through so much together, and they'd survived. More than survived, they'd grown stronger. The pizza arrived, and they ate it straight from the box while watching an action movie Jake had chosen. It was a perfect, ordinary evening, unremarkable in its simplicity, and that's what made it extraordinary. After trauma, after upheaval, after everything they'd been through, they'd found their way to these ordinary moments of peace and connection. Later, after the kids had gone to bed, Sarah stood at her bedroom window looking out at the quiet street. The leaves were beginning to turn, autumn painting the neighborhood in shades of gold and red. In a few weeks, it would be a year since the break-in. A year since her life had been upended by violence and fear. She thought about marking the anniversary somehow, but she wasn't sure how. It wasn't exactly something to celebrate, but it also felt significant, a marker of how far she'd come. The answer came a few days later when Monica suggested they organize a community event. A safety fair, Monica proposed over coffee. In partnership with the police department, the victim advocacy program, local businesses, we could have booths on home security, self-defense classes, information about community resources. Make it family-friendly, educational, empowering. That's perfect, Sarah said. Could we time it for early November, around the anniversary of my break-in? Turning your trauma into something that helps the whole community. I love it. They spent the next month organizing the event. Local businesses donated time and resources. The police department brought their community outreach team. A martial arts studio offered free self-defense demonstrations. A security company provided free home assessments. The fire department came with their truck, teaching kids about fire safety. The safety fair took place on the first Saturday of November, exactly 1 year and a day after Sarah's break-in. The weather cooperated, providing a crisp, clear autumn day. The community center's parking lot, filled with booths, displays, and activities. Sarah stood at the victim advocacy booth with Monica, handing out resource lists and talking with residents about available support services. Throughout the day, people stopped to thank her, to share their own stories, to tell her how her courage had inspired them. One woman, about Sarah's age, approached the booth hesitantly. "Are you Sarah Mitchell?" "I am. I read about what happened to you, about how you got through it and then started helping others. I want you to know that your story gave me the courage to finally leave my abusive husband. I'd been too afraid for years. But if you could face down armed intruders, I could face down leaving him. I've been in a shelter for 2 months now, and I'm rebuilding my life. Thank you." Sarah felt tears well in her eyes. "I'm so glad you're safe. That took tremendous courage. Are you getting support?" "I am. I'm working with an advocate, going to therapy, taking it day by day." After the woman left, Sarah stood quietly for a moment, overwhelmed by the impact her story had had. She'd survived one terrible night, and that survival was rippling outward, giving other people hope and courage. Detective Chen stopped by the booth later in the afternoon. "Hell of a turnout. I'd say about 300 people have come through today." "It's been incredible. I never imagined this kind of response. People need to know they're not alone. They need to see examples of survival and strength. You've given them that, Sarah. You've transformed something terrible into something meaningful." As the sun began to set and the fair wound down, Sarah helped pack up the booth. She was exhausted, but filled with a profound sense of peace. She'd faced her trauma head-on, used it as fuel for growth rather than allowing it to diminish her. She'd found purpose, community, and a deeper understanding of her own resilience. Emma and Jake had volunteered at the fair, helping with setup and working at various booths. As they drove home together, Jake asked, "Mom, are you glad we moved back here, even with everything that happened?" Sarah thought about the question. A year ago, she would have said moving to Riverside was a desperate last resort, a failure, a step backward. Now she saw it differently. "Yes," she said honestly. "I am. It's been hard and scary at times, but it's also been where I found myself again, where we all found ourselves. This town, this house, it's where we became who we're meant to be." "I'm glad too," Jake said quietly. "I wasn't at first, but now I am." "Me too," Emma added from the back seat. "This feels like home in a way the old house never did." That night, after the kids were asleep, Sarah walked through her quiet house. She paused at the basement door, now reinforced and painted a cheerful yellow. She looked out the kitchen window at the backyard where she'd fled in terror a year ago. She stood in the living room where she'd called 911 with shaking hands. Each space held a memory of that night, but they also held new memories. The basement now housed Jake's workshop, where he built robotics projects. The backyard had a vegetable garden they'd planted together in the spring. The living room had hosted movie nights, dinner parties with new friends, quiet evenings reading by the fireplace. The house had been reclaimed. The fear had been faced. The trauma had been integrated into her story without defining it. Sarah climbed the stairs to her bedroom, the same room where the intruders had searched for valuables a year ago. She'd redecorated it completely, painting the walls a soft blue, buying new furniture, adding artwork that made her smile. It was her sanctuary now, a place of rest and peace. As she lay in bed, Sarah thought about her father's journal entry. The words about courage being love plus fear plus action. She'd loved her children and herself enough to be afraid for their safety. She'd felt that fear fully, acknowledged it, honored it, and then she'd acted, escaping the danger, healing the trauma, building something meaningful from the ashes. Love plus fear plus action. It was a formula for survival, for growth, for transformation. It was the story of her past year, the foundation of her new life, the legacy she was building for her children. Sarah closed her eyes, feeling safe in her own home, at peace with her choices, confident in her strength. The masked intruders had broken into her house expecting to find an easy victim. Instead, they'd encountered a woman who'd discovered she was capable of extraordinary courage, a woman who'd transformed trauma into purpose, fear into strength, victimhood into empowerment. And, in the process, she'd found her way home, not just to this house on Maple Street, but to herself, to the strong, capable, purposeful woman she'd always been, hidden beneath years of self-doubt and diminishment. That woman had always been there, waiting for the moment when she'd be needed. And when that moment came, she'd risen to meet it. Now, a year later, she was still rising, still growing, still becoming. And she knew with absolute certainty that whatever challenges lay ahead, she would face them with courage, with grace, and with the unshakable knowledge that she was strong enough to handle whatever life brought her way. But she also focused on the life she was building in Riverside. She joined the Historical Society, helping to preserve and document the town's history. She volunteered at the women's shelter, offering support to women leaving abusive relationships. She reconnected with old friends from high school, building new relationships based on who she was now, not who she'd been at 18. Derek remained in Detroit, seeing the children on weekends and holidays. His relationship with the young woman from his office didn't last, and by summer he was dating someone new, someone closer to his own age. He and Sarah settled into a civil co-parenting relationship, not warm but functional. One evening in late summer, Sarah stood in her backyard watching the sunset. The garden that had been overgrown and neglected was now thriving, full of vegetables and flowers that she and the children had planted together. The tool shed had been painted and repaired. The house itself had been updated. New roof, updated electrical, fresh paint inside and out. But more than the physical changes, Sarah felt the internal transformation. She was no longer the woman who had arrived in Riverside 8 months ago, defeated and frightened and unsure. She was stronger now, more confident, more herself than she'd been in years. Her phone buzzed with a text from Emma, away at a pre-college program. "Miss you, Mom. Can't wait to come home next week." Home, not her dad's apartment. Here, this house, this life they'd built together. Sarah smiled and typed back, "Miss you too, so proud of you." She thought about that night, the night the masked intruders had broken in. They'd come looking for easy targets, for quick money, for vulnerability. Instead, they'd found strength. They'd found a woman who refused to be a victim, who fought back, who survived. That experience had cost her something, her sense of complete safety, her naive belief that bad things only happen to other people. But it had given her something too. Confidence, resilience, the knowledge that she could handle whatever life threw at her. Sarah went inside as the last light faded from the sky. She locked the doors, set the alarm, and checked the security cameras, all new habits that had become routine. But she didn't check them out of fear. She checked them out of practicality, out of reasonable caution. In the living room, Jake was sprawled on the couch, working on a summer reading assignment. He looked up when she entered, smiled, and returned to his book. So different from the silent, withdrawn boy he'd been in the aftermath of the break-in. Sarah sat in her mother's old armchair, the one she'd reupholstered in a cheerful floral pattern. She picked up the book she'd been reading, a memoir about resilience and second chances. As she read, she felt a deep sense of peace. This house on Maple Street, the house she'd sworn she'd never return to, had become her sanctuary, the place where she'd faced her greatest fear and discovered her greatest strength, the place where she was building a new life for herself and her children, a life based not on who she'd been or who others thought she should be, but on who she truly was. Outside, the summer night was peaceful, full of cricket songs and the distant sound of neighbors talking on their porches. Inside, Sarah was home, not just in a physical structure of walls and rooms, but in herself. She'd found her way back to who she was meant to be. The masked intruders had entered an old house expecting to find easy prey. Instead, they'd encountered a woman who'd spent her whole life preparing for that moment without knowing it. A woman whose father had taught her courage, whose mother had taught her resilience, whose own experiences had taught her that strength comes not from avoiding challenges, but from facing them head on. And in facing them and surviving them and using them to grow rather than being diminished by them, Sarah had become truly free. She'd reclaimed her home, her sense of safety, her confidence in her own capabilities. More importantly, she'd shown her children what it means to be brave, to get back up when life knocks you down, to transform trauma into strength. The house on Maple Street stood quiet in the summer night. no longer just a reminder of the past, but a foundation for the future. And within its walls, a divorced mother who'd once felt defeated and alone had discovered that she was neither. She was a survivor. She was strong. She was exactly where she needed to be. As Sarah turned the page of her book, she caught sight of a photo on the mantel. Her father in his military uniform, young and serious. She smiled at the image, remembering his words about courage being love plus fear plus action. She'd lived those words, she'd embodied them, and she'd teach them to her children, just as her father had taught them to her. The masked intruders had thought they were breaking into a house. They had no idea they were confronting a fortress, protected not by walls or weapons, but by the indomitable spirit of a woman who'd finally come home to herself.